Good afternoon, I guess. It's not morning. Good afternoon. I was going to say good morning. Um, Let me double check my microphone's working. That's that's going to forever be a thing for me. After my muted streamed debacle. All right. Well, how you guys doing? I am back. I didn't stream yesterday. Yesterday was crazy busy work day. A lot. I didn't work from home. It was at the office. We had lots of stuff going on. Uh, so yeah, I didn't stream much, didn't make much content, didn't do much programming. Um, One thing I did do, which is kind of funny, is so if you've been following along um, on some of my streams or some of my other videos, I have been working on setting up NeoVim, and one of the plugins that I used or just recently set up is called NeoTest, and I set it up for .NET projects. Um, I set it up for a .NET project, and I was trying to get it set up for a Playwright project. They have an adapter for that, NeoTest-Playwright, or somebody wrote an adapter for that. But there seemed to be an issue with. There's a kind of a small issue. I don't know if you. I mean, I think I'll be surprised at what happens if they actually merge my pull request or not. But basically, the way this adapter works is it runs Playwright under the hood and uses the JSON reporter from Playwright to parse out what all tests are there in your project, and then uses that to display the nice tree in your that you see in NeoVim. However, if the output has anything that's not JSON, so if the output isn't just completely valid JSON, it breaks. And so I had an issue, and so I actually logged an issue yesterday on this plugin. So basically, this is the command at a high level. At a high level, this is the command that this adapter executes, or the command that this adapter builds, and then NeoTest executes the command to produce an output that is then parsed and used to display your test explorer information. And I had in the project I was trying to set up, I have a couple dependencies that were producing these warnings, and obviously the easy fix here is just address these warnings wherever these warnings are coming from. You could just address that, which I did, and that fixed it. But then I thought, well, what if these warnings are coming from a package you can't upgrade in some way or change in some way to get rid of them, or maybe you just can't do it right now, right? You can't do it at this very moment. And so what I thought is, then in this case, and here's some of the logs that get printed out when the error happens. Essentially, it's basically just trying to decode and deserialize some JSON, and it can't do it. So my solution is we need to parse it better. So this is the function that does the parsing. And you're wondering, like, this is something I always wondered too before I really started programming and coding, was like, how do you figure out what's going wrong with something like this, like a plugin that you didn't write, you have no, and it really just comes down to kind of like you digging in to figure it out, right? So, so then I started to kind of go through the source code, and this is the function that's producing the error, right? And you can kind of, it helps if you read the stack trace, right? So there's a stack trace here that tells me, if I could draw, that tells me that it's coming from that run function. So you can see here in the existing implementation, it does a few checks. It does some execution of that command. It gets back the output, and then it basically makes sure, hey, is it a string? Is it an empty string? But then immediately, if it's not an empty string, it just assumes that it's all valid JSON and it tries to decode it. I'm not super familiar with the inner workings of this particular Vim function, um, which this is also another weird thing about this plugin. The plugin is actually written in TypeScript and then it's compiled to Lua. It's something called TypeScript to Lua transpiler. Yeah, it's I never heard of this before, so this is very new. But so that's why it's kind of weird if you look through the source code for this plugin. There's calls to these Vim APIs, but that's because everything's authored in Playwright, then transpiled to Lua, and so the expectation is all of this is going to run in a Lua runtime, right? So anyways, we get down here. So if you get to this point, like I did, and you have an output that has this shape or this kind of values in it, this breaks, right? Because this is not valid JSON. So my solution was basically just to add some additional checks and handling for that. So so all we're going to do is we're going to say we're going to match the output for that. Basically, this is a Lua expression for basically balanced parentheses. So basically, we're just going to make sure that we have two curly braces, and we're going to match for everything in between, including those curly braces. If there's no match, well, that's an issue, right? Because we expect this command to produce some sort of JSON object. If there is a match, we'll get the first one. Then we'll call decode. This should work. And this alone, without the try catch, this alone solved the issue I was having, and this is just to, in case there's some other further edge case that you don't know about, we'll catch the error and then we'll admit that error, right? So then now we'll get a more, because the error, there wasn't really an error message being surfaced in NeoVim. It was basically just, hey, when you go look through your file explorer, it would show like your test directory structure, but it wouldn't show the individual files. And so the only way you would actually know that there was an error is you'd have to go look at the log and see, oh wait, there's something happened here. And in this case now, when we actually reach this state or either of these states, now we have a much more specific, hey, there's something odd with either there's no JSON to be parsed, or we tried to parse it. We tried to parse it. We tried to deserialize it, and we couldn't. And so hopefully that just helps people not spend as much time as I spent trying to figure this out. So I opened a pull request here, and you can see here's the files I changed. I put the package lock on the gitignore because it's not in the repo to begin with. So I just added it to the gitignore so that I didn't accidentally commit it. I'm assuming there's a reason why the author didn't want a package lock in source code, but and then all I did was modify. Oh, so this is the Lua. Okay, so I modified this function. So this is the function I modified, right? So this is that same code I just showed you. Now this up here, this playwright.lua, this is the Lua that comes from transpiling the TypeScript. And that's checked in because that's the code that the plugin actually runs when you install the plugin, or when you add the plugin as an install the plugin and add the adapter to NeoTest. The Lua code is actually what's going to run in NeoVim. So that's why that's there, and that's checked in as part of the repo. So yeah, kind of interesting. I just started kind of I just started kind of down the NeoVim rabbit hole, but it's cool to be able to see kind of your understanding grow, and then also be able to see yourself take things that you've learned and the abilities that you've spent a lot of time gathering and actually apply them to kind of solve a problem that you're having. So if you come across the same issue, I do have a fork of the repo. Um, you can go, let's see, here, Neotest Playwright. There's a fork, and there's also there's a branch here that's open right now, um, which I won't delete until if the fix gets merged. So if you're having the same issue and you want to use this forked version and that particular branch, go right ahead. Yeah, that was cool. I was happy with myself that I did that. And again, if you're somebody who's just starting to code or just starting to program and you think, how do people figure out how to make contributions? How do people figure out how to fix an issue with a particular package or plugin or thing that they're working with? There's really not any magic to it. It's really just kind of about digging in and doing the legwork to try to understand how the project was structured, what was put together. Sometimes packages will have nice contribution documentation, but a lot of times it's not, and you just kind of have to do that legwork to dig in and figure it out. That's part of that kind of developer, programmer, engineer mindset. All right. So what now? What now? Okay, we're actually going to do something today, but before we get to that, we're actually going to do some code. We're going to do some code. We're actually going to write some code. We're going to try to start working on building something today. But one thing I wanted to tell you about is, so just sticking with this whole NeoVim theme, we've been working on setting up NeoVim, or I've been working on setting up NeoVim, and you guys have been watching me do that. Which has been a lot of fun. But obviously, I don't want to just continue making every stream that I do all about configuring NeoVim. That's not super fun or probably a good productive use of the time that we have to spend working on things. So I kind of continued my NeoVim journey on my own off stream, off video. And so now I have a pretty robust configuration. I've added several things to it. Let's see if I can show you. In them, a lot of it, the core functionality is stuff that you've seen, right? It's the test explorer, the debugger, but I added some things. I added some other niceties like what else did I add? I added some niceties like rainbow. I added a rainbow colorization to opening and closing brackets. If you're familiar with VS Code, there's a rainbow, I forget what it's called, rainbow something extension, and this is a very similar extension for NeoVim. I also added these indent guides, right, that show you kind of the current scope that you're in, which is kind of nice. See how that indent guide gets highlighted. It's kind of nice, helps your eyes visually track where you are. The other thing that I added that's kind of a nice to have, which I really liked in VS Code, is this idea of like sticky scroll. And so if you see, as I scroll down, if you watch up here at the top, this test.describe block, as I scroll further down, you'll see it kind of sticks at the top there. And as I scroll through and I kind of enter deeper and deeper scopes, those scopes will kind of stick there at the top, just to help you understand where exactly you are in a particular file, which is kind of nice. Like you can see right there now, it tells me that I'm inside that particular test. And if I scroll down a little farther, I'm guessing if my window was smaller, I would also see some other information. So it's just kind of nice to be able to be like, okay, where exactly am I in this file, and where have I been, and what's above me? It just adds a lot of context. That is all to say, and I'm sure I'll do kind of like a more thorough tour of my NeoVim like current configuration at some point. It's obviously very much in like a nascent stage, and it's probably not all right, and I probably haven't worked out all the kinks. So maybe kind of delay that full tour of the setup and the configuration for a little bit later. But what I wanted to make you aware of is I put all my NeoVim configurations on my GitHub. So let's go ahead and quit out of here. And so if we go back over to GitHub, if you go to my repositories, I have it under env config, and it's public. So you're welcome to go in there and clone it and use it for yourself. I kind of point you to that NeoVim for Noobs course if that's something you're interested in. I still think that is kind of the best starting point, right? I don't think in my opinion so far, I don't think anyone's probably going to be able to take somebody's config and just dump it in and just make it work and understand it all. So it's probably makes this most sense for most people to start with something like NeoVim for Noobs and really make it your own. But hopefully this can kind of be like a place of reference for you to say, well, how did he get that to work, or what exactly did he put there? And obviously this is going to change over time, but it's a Git repo. So as I make changes, you'll be able to still go back in time and see how things were on previous commits at previous points in time. So hopefully this just serves as a nice resource for you. Oh, looks like I've got one viewer. So what I was just saying, I don't know if you just got here. We're getting ready to build something, but what I wanted to share was I've been working on setting up NeoVim, and so far I hadn't shared the exact specific configurations because I was following along on this NeoVim for Noobs course. But now I did. I have a public repo. If you go to GitHub/Stephen Freeborn /invim config, this is the current configuration I'm going to use, and it'll likely change. There's likely still kinks and things to work out, but hopefully this kind of serves as a nice jumping off point for you if you're interested in working in NeoVim. All right, so what are we doing today? So I have this idea. So I talked about this the other day, but one of the common things I find myself doing a lot with LLMs is using them to generate alt text, right? So if you use something like Blue Sky or really any, Blue Sky, LinkedIn, I think most of the social media platforms nowadays, when you upload a photo, they present you this option to add alt text. And this probably sounds lazy of me, but I feel like people who need alt text deserve to have a really great alt text. That we should put as much effort into making things as accessible as possible. However, I feel horrible at actually writing good alt text. I feel like, man, this is a task that I feel like I could probably spend quite a bit of time developing as a skill to really do a good job. However, with things like LLMs, I feel like an LLM is probably far better suited to do alt text generation in a consistent and scalable way than me having to generate unique alt text for every image I want to post somewhere or share somewhere. Because I think 9 times out of 10, what's going to happen is people are just not going to put the alt text, right? Because they're in the middle of wanting to share something, and they don't want to stop and write 2 or 3 sentences, well-written, descriptive sentences, to share for people who need that accessibility. And that's no fault to me or those people. I understand there's a friction there. So I feel like this is where we could use generative AI. We could use an LLM to help this issue, right? It could be a great tool that solves a problem I have, but probably could help solve for other people where I want to do the right thing. I want to add alt text, but I also don't want it to take me a lot of time, and I also don't want it to be bad. I want it to be relatively good. And now we have this new technology that can understand what's in an image and then can describe it really well with words. I just feel like this, and I've had uh, a lot of good success doing this manually myself. So usually what I do is I'll have the image here, then I'll go over to something like ChatGPT or Claude. I'll open that up. I'll click, start a new chat message. I'll do something like this where I upload from my computer. Or if I'm on my phone, I'll do it from my phone. And I'll say something really, I mean, this isn't even a great prompt, but I'll say something like, generate some alt text for this image. Don't let me down. And then it'll spit that out. And then usually I'll just take this, copy it, and paste it in here. And right, like the quality of this and what's good and what's bad alt text, right, could be debated. And we could probably spend some time working on what's the best prompt as part of this kind of tool I'm talking about. And how do we evaluate that? And maybe there's some baseline standards we can look up as far as accessibility goes to help us. But yeah, so I'm thinking I want to create some sort of tool that just kind of automates this, right? I know this is a pretty simple interaction, right? I paste an image, type of prompt, copy and paste. I understand that that's a pretty simple interaction, but it could be far simplified and it could be improved, right? So it could be actually as simple as I upload one file or more than one file to a web UI and click generate alt text. And then this tool or this service that we're going to create has a nicely written prompt that's been well tested, that has been verified to produce decent alt text. And then that web UI or whatever particular interface just returns those results for each file. Maybe we use the file name as a key and then some alt text with it. So that's the general kind of outline of what I want to work on trying to build. And as far as like what exactly shape that's going to take, here's kind of what I'm thinking. That delete all this. So here's kind of what I'm thinking. I'm thinking we have an API, right? So the reason why this is really zoomed in. Why is that so zoomed in? We're going to have an API like this. And that's going to be separate. So that's going to be like the main service. And this API is basically going to have like one endpoint that's like post generate or something like that, right? And then it's going to take in obviously a file, right? And we could do some validation, like maybe we'll only support specific file types, like I don't know what file types does ChatGPT support? What image? Because particularly this is going to be for images, right? We're going to kind of scope that down. So PNG, JPEG, GIF. So maybe that's what we start with, right? So maybe instead of file, this should be image, and it should be PNG, GIF, and some version of JPEG, PPG, or JPG, like that. And so then, and the other thing that's going to be here, because I don't want to provide, at least at the moment, I don't want to provide the LLM. I want that to be something that the user configures or provides in some way. So it'll also need some sort of API key for the LLM provider. And then probably we could use different LLM providers. So like LLM provider of choice, choice, LLM provider. And so this could be, we could do OpenAI, we could do Anthropic, and we could do Gemini. And I think I'm actually going to start with Gemini because I have a bunch of free credits with Google's in the Cloud Console. So I think I actually might start by implementing Gemini. But essentially, we could have the GUI or whatever interface we expose the API through. We could have the user select. So like user. User can select LLM of choice. And then on the back end in our API, we will resolve the right service, right? So if you're using OpenAI, we'll resolve that right service, and we'll do all that work to translate this image to whatever needs to be sent to whatever LLM provider that you want to talk to, because all these LLMs have a little bit different. They have a little bit different APIs, so we'll have to kind of massage the code a little bit, do that translation. Okay, so that's kind of the central idea here, or I guess the meat and potatoes, I should say. Then what I think this would allow us to do is we could have a couple different clients. So then we could also have two different clients. I personally, and I'm kind of building this from this perspective of like solving my own problem, where if I'm on my desktop computer, like if I'm here working on my computer, since I am in the terminal a lot, I honestly would like a console app where I could do something as simple as let's say it's called the binary. Let's say that the command's going to be alt gen, or maybe alt text gen, something like that. And then you pass it your file. And that console app is just going to make a request over to our API. And maybe there's also like a alt text. So maybe we say alt text and the command is gen, and then maybe there's also an alt text config, and you have to give it a provider, which would be, say it's Gemini, and you say key. I guess this should be that. And then your key over here. And so then that would allow you to have a console app that you could configure. You could set your configuration once, or really you could change it whenever you want to. But you could set that once, right? And then now you could just, hey, anywhere you are, whenever you're on the terminal and you have some image, you want to get some alt text for alt text gen, and we could have some way to kind of like pretty print that out to the console. Maybe it's like a table, and it has your file name plus your alt text that was generated for it. Yeah, so that's one client we could build for it. And then obviously it would be great to have a GUI, right? Because especially if you're like out and about, and you want to post something from your phone, you could have alt text generation from the browser, right? So this would be a web UI. And this would be it doesn't have to be a super complicated GUI, really. This could just be, isn't GUI a weird word? It sounds weird. The more you say it, the weirder it sounds. But what we could do is have a web UI, and this, I'm imagining, is just going to be a form that again exposes those same inputs. So LLM provider, key, and then file or files. So this would either be, this would just be a form essentially, like a form that has a drop down where they can select the different supported providers, text input for your key, like a mass text input for your key, and then a file input, so you can upload more than one file. And then all that web UI is going to do is just going to turn around and make some API requests to this backend that we set back here. So I think they'll all live separate. They'll live in the same repo, but they'll be deployed and published and built separate from each other. So this likely is going to be a Docker container that I'll just host on my own little VPS. And we probably put some rate limiting around it because, again, I don't mind if other people use it. It's really only consuming my compute. I'm not providing, at least at this point, I'm not providing any type of LLM. It's a bring your own LLM type of thing. But I can just host it on my server. We can do some rate limiting so people can't, try to spam 1,000 generate requests over the course of a minute. And then, so this will be on a Docker container. Docker container. We'll Dockerize that. The console obviously we'll just publish that as a binary that people can download and put in their path and use. And then the web UI, let me add my arrow here. Publish as a binary. And then this guy, I think, is going to be a view, probably view. I don't know. I haven't written any React in a while, so maybe React, or maybe something completely new. I don't know. I don't really. I really just want to build this. I don't want to just. So this will be either a Vue or React app. And we could put this in a Docker container and deploy it on the same VPS as this Docker container. But honestly, what I want to say, honestly, yeah, maybe that's what we'll do. Just Dockerize it, put it in a Docker container, and deploy it alongside that other one. I mean, they're independent of each other. Then they don't have to. It's all gonna live in the same repo, but they can be deployed and built separate. So, because I could actually, like, this could be as simple as just, because this app will just basically be a client side statically rendered at the end of the day, right? We'll write it and bundle it and build it, and then it could be served from an S3 bucket. It could be served from a GitHub Pages. So yeah, so this will either be Docker container, which feels like overkill, but one of the nice things with doing this with the Docker container is then I can put Nginx in that container with it, and then I can put that behind my reverse proxy on my VPS. My reverse proxy can hit that container, and Nginx within the container then can also do like some rewriting of requests to then communicate directly to this Docker container. And then I don't have to worry about setting this URL into the build of this, but we can work it out. We're a long way from deploying it, but this is kind of the overall. This is the overarching idea of what I want to build. And if no one ever uses it but me, I'll be a happy man, because I find myself needing and wanting to generate this alt text enough, and when I'm on my phone, it involves switching between apps and copying and then typing the prompt out. This way, hopefully, I'll just have something I can go to a bookmarked web page, stick my file in there, get back some JSON, click a button to copy it, stick it in blue text or blue sky or LinkedIn, and then feel good that I've done my part to make sure and provide good alt text for my images. And hopefully then people who need that accessibility when they're using those services feel like people actually put in some effort to make that experience good for them. So yeah, that's the plan. What do you think? We dive in? I think we start with the API. So I think that's where we start. So let's go ahead and set up our project. So we are going to go back up here, and we are going to go to our maker cd into this guy, and let's disable read line for a second. Let's make a dir called, what do you want to call this? Well, let's see if Gemini could help us. Can you come up with a good app name for an LLM powered alt text generator? Alt gen. I like that. Alt gen. Inclusive alt text, AI image captioning, automated image description. I kind of like alt gen. What do you think? Alt gen? Let's go with that. Now, naming things is hard. Spending a lot of time on it's not worth it. So we'll say make dir alt gen. And this will be our top. So what do I want to do here? I think what I want to do is, well, first thing I need to do is add a readme. Then I want to make a dir called source. So I always think that's nice and tidy for like your top level, not to have just like a crap ton of like config files and random stuff in there. So I'll put my source directory there. I'm gonna put my, because there's gonna be a mix of a little mix of technologies here. So what do I want to do? I think what I want to do is I want to have I need to get ignore. And I'm going to do this. So the technologies I'm going to use are going to be C#. I'm going to write the API in .NET. I'll do the console app in .NET, and then the web UI will be in React or Vue. I think I'm going to do the web UI in, I don't know. I'll pick that last, so I don't have to decide today. So let's focus. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to build the web. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to build the web API. So let's say .NET new get ignore. .NET new editor config. And there's a couple things I need to change in the editor config, but I'll do that in a minute. We will go into the source, and we need to add .NET add SLN. We're going to give that the name of alt gen. .NET SLN add alt. Oh no, it's .NET new. .NET new SLN name alt gen. With my solution file, then I'll make a .NET new web API, and I'm going to out that to alt gen dot API. And then we'll do .NET new XUnit. So we're going to write tests. We're going to write tests, people. It's important. It's important to write tests. Let's say it all again together. It's important to write tests. Then we'll say .NET new XUnit -o, and that's going to be alt gen, you guessed it, API dot tests. Okay, now we need to wire all this together. So we'll say .NET SLN add .NET SLN add that. Then we need to add a reference from our tests. We need to add a reference to our API project in our test project. So we'll say .NET add, and we're adding to this a reference to this. Then we should be able to say .NET build. That should all build. And we should be able to say .NET run -- project alt gen API. And that should work. And I think by default, this has like a forecast endpoint. Or maybe it's weather. Weather forecast. What is it? There's some sort of default endpoint in there. Let's see, cat alt gen weather forecast. I tried everything but what it was. And it lives. Okay. So let's then also add a couple of niceties. So I'm going to try to do this in a as much as I can in like a test-driven development way, because that's how I want to code. I don't always code like that, but I should, and I always feel better, and I always end up with a better outcome. Yeah. If I practice test-driven development, it takes a little bit longer to get productive sooner. But if I put in that little bit of upfront time, it pays off dividends as I continue working. So what we're going to do is we are going to go into our test project, and we are going to add some nice extensions or packages. So actually, I have a plugin for this in NeoVim. So if I say invim, let's see, what is it? NuGet? I think it's NuGet something. I don't even know how to use it. NeoVim NuGet. Forgot what the default. There was some default. Yeah, defaults. Ni install NuGet. So if I type leader ni, and I should be able to search for the first one I want to add is nvc.testing. So this package right here is just incredibly killer for doing integration testing with .NET projects. Essentially, what you can do in .NET is, you know how a lot of people will, as they're building their API, if you're building it in Node, or even if you're building it in C#, a lot of people will start up their API in something like watch mode, so that they can make changes and have those changes reflected immediately, like a hot load feature. And then they'll use a tool like Postman, or they'll use a tool like Swagger or something like that to actually make test requests against their API that's running. Well, with this package, what you can do is you can do kind of complete integration testing, where you can actually bring your API and start it up in memory and make requests against it and actually test it in sort of this really integrated, almost end-to-end fashion. But you can write your test as if you're writing like unit tests. So it makes it very convenient, right? You don't have to kind of go to some button or some Swagger page or some Postman page and keep repeating that request. And that, once you write it once, you can just automatedly rerun it again and again and again. So we're going to add this guy. And yep, just add that version. Well, that must be the output for installing it. How do I close that? Okay, so now I think if I go to my CS project file, Liminex. Oh, that's the XML. I need to install that. But did it add it here? Doesn't look like it added it. Let's try it again. Space ni mvc.testing. It'd be kind of a bummer if this doesn't work, because it's a really nice. There we go. Installed package, Microsoft. There we go. It's right here. Or was it here the whole time? Am I tripping? Maybe it was here the whole time. So, but it's installed now. So now we have that ability to do those integration tests. The other thing I'm going to add is an assertion library, which, if you haven't heard, normally I use Fluent assertions. Yeah, Fluent assertions. But apparently there's been a really big to do with Fluent assertions. They changed their license for version 8. So if you do want to use Fluent assertions, you need to stay on 7 or below, because if you use 8 and you want to use and you're using it in a project that's a commercial project, you should be having a paid license. So what I think I can do is I can just install Fluent assertions and make sure it is version 7.1, and I'll be fine. But I personally prefer using Fluent assertions for my assertions. I just think it's very, very convenient. So let's go over here and we'll say, is it a must? Again, is it a must have? No, it's one of those nice to have things. So we'll say leader ni, and we want Fluent assertions. And then we just want to make sure, again, if you install 8, and you don't need a license unless you're using it for commercial purposes. And right now, I don't know what this thing is going to end up being, this alt gen thing. So I'm just gonna install version 7. Okay, and that's installed now. I think it is. Is there a way to source percent or source person? Right, I'm gonna try to go CS prod. And yeah, there's flow instructions right there. But that's the 8.0 version. I don't want 8.0. I want 7.1. Uh, 7.1.0. Okay. So now I think we're in a place where we can start doing some damage. So first things first, let's take care of our README. And this is an LLM powered uh, um, maybe we just say an LLM powered LLM powered alternative text generator for images. Perfect. Oh, if you're wondering where that autocomplete's coming from, I pay for Copilot, and I pay $10 a month for it, and I use it. I used it a lot in Visual Studio Code. So I was like, hey, if I'm going to switch to NeoVim, I'm paying $10 for Copilot. I need to be able to use Copilot NeoVim, and so there is a Copilot NeoVim extension. If you go to my repo on GitHub / GitHub / Stephen Freeborn / invim config. In that repository, I show how I have Copilot set up. It's really simple to install. It's like you just install the plugin, you restart NeoVim, and then you authenticate, and you're good to go. Okay, so now I also need to update my git ignore because um, for some reason, app settings aren't ignored by default. Part of this template. So I always do app settings star.json, and then I do app settings. I don't ignore app settings.example.json in case there's anything in the actual app setting configuration. I usually like to check in an example configuration into the repository so people have it. And then I need to also go to my editor config, but that's not in that because find files doesn't show dot files. Go to my editor config, and I need to change indent size to 2. I also need to find prefer conditional. Oops. Prefer conditional over assignment or over return. So I don't prefer expressions on returns, so I always set this to false, and then I set this to silent. And there's some other things I need to change here too. but I'm going to change them once they come up in my source code. Okay, so if we're following good TDD, right, we should not try to do any type of implementation quite yet. We should start with a test. But let's fix some of this. Use explicit type instead of var. That is part of my editor config. I prefer var. I typically on left-handed variable declaration and C# I prefer var. I know not everybody agrees with that, but that's my personal preference. So we're gonna say editor big. Nope, that's not right. Big. Then we need to find prefer. Actually, I just search for var. Var elsewhere. C# var for built-in types. True. Right. Quit all. If I go back to program.cs, we shouldn't see those warnings anymore. Okay, I need to get rid of this one. Expression value is never used. That one is actually some sort of IDE warning. Expression value is never used. C# style, unused value expression, statement preference. So I can call it discard variable or unused local. So I think what I need to do is I just need to silence this because I don't want to use a discard. What they're talking about, if you're not familiar with C#, they basically, because this has a value, when it's executed, they would prefer, based on these code style rules, they would prefer this. I don't like that, so I'm going to say don't do that, and I'm going to say prefer, what was it called? Discard? Let's search for discard. Discard. Unused value assignment preference, discard variable. Yeah, I don't want a suggestion. I want this to be silent. Yep, silent. Right, quit all. And I know there's more, but I'll just kind of take care of them as I go. And then I need to actually probably save this off as my own like editor config template. What the heck? Still complaining. I'm the wrong thing. And do forgive me if I seem like an oaf navigating uh, my project. I'm still only a couple weeks in to using NeoVim, and so everything feels foreign. But I'm doing my best to really to really commit, right, and really give this a real shot as an editor. So stick with me. I hope to get better. why is this still showing up? Because I set this to silent. Oh god, no, I don't want to rename that file. Uh, see what code actions it gives me. No, I don't want to use a discard. I'm surprised I can't silence it that way. But I have to suppress it this way. Okay, and I'll do it. Seems like overkill. I promise I'll write some code eventually. I just okay. Accessibility modifier required. What's that? Ability modifier required. I don't think I want to, but maybe I should. I kind of like omitting it if it's default. So let's put editor config. What's that called? .NET style require. I realize actually I'm running out of lunchtime. Okay, so let's at least get a test written, right? What do you think? Let's get a test written. So the first thing we're gonna do is we need to go to our test project, and we are gonna add some namespaces. So we're gonna write integration. Oops, that should have been a directory. Integration. And this needs to have a app factory.cs. And in here, we are going to do some stuff. Namespace is going to be alt gen dot API dot test dot integration. And this is actually going to be a public class that inherits from web application factory. So this comes from, this type comes from that mvc.testing. And then program, it can't be resolved at the moment because it is over here, and that there is no program because we're using a top level. So the way you fix this, the way I usually fix this is I usually declare a public partial class called program, like this. And then I usually annotate this with code coverage, exclude from code coverage, like that. We need to use them for that. This is also something I like to abuse. This is a feature that I like to abuse in modern.NET, is you can declare a what do I want to call it? You can declare like a global usings file. So you can say, I usually do usings.cs. Then what you can do is you can say, okay, I don't want that here because I'm probably going to need it in other files or potentially in other files. And so I'm going to put that in usings.cs. And here I will put the global modifier. Excuse me. Now if I go back to program CS, it's happy because it's a global using. At least it should be happy. Okay, now it's happy. So I just needed to edit it. Now I'm actually going to do the same thing with my test project. So I'll add a using.cs over here. And I know some people don't like this feature. Microsoft.asp.NET Core testing. Oh. I know some people like usings because they like to look at a file and be able to see what's in it. This can all go away. I don't know what I want to do there yet. This is going to be a using directive. Pull that out. Here. Ah. Okay, back to the app factory. So this right here is what's going to allow us to do what we need to do. This is what's going to allow us to basically test our app in memory. This is going to basically load it up. So what we need to do is we need an app factory that inherits from web application factory. And then here in the configure web host, this is where you can override things. So you can do like configure, you can override things in configure services. You can do change things in configure logging. I think there's also a configure test services. So yeah, you can do a lot here with that. With this particular API, but there's nothing I want to do right now here. What I want to do right now is I want to create like a base integration test class. So I'm going to create a base. I usually just call it integration test. And then in here, base gen API. Not quite what I want to do. I mean, it's really close. It's api.test integration. You'll notice GitHub Copilot, it always wants to write block. Whoops. It always wants to write block scoped namespaces, which just betrays like how much code it's been trained on. That's kind of older .NET code, because not everybody uses for most part, if you're starting new projects, almost everybody uses file scoped namespaces. So it'll be interesting to see over time how Copilot's suggestions evolve to to basically kind of disclose, oh hey, the training data has changed, or they've added more up to date training data. It's kind of interesting. So we want a public class that's going to be an integration test. It's going to have an iClass fixture. Yep, and it's going to have an app factory. And that's going to be set to factory. And actually, let's write a test for the existing API. That might be what we have time for today. So Copilot kind of did that work for us, but let's pull this out into a separate file. Whoops. The constructor. We'll also remove the defaults. No, don't want to do any of those things. We just want to remove the private. So you don't need to specify private, because private is you don't need to specify private, because private's the default, right? So okay, then one thing I do want to do here is I want to have a protected read-only client, and I want that to get created here. No, I don't want to use body. Come on, Copilot, where are you? Integration test, app, factory. There you go. I guess right now we actually don't need to hold on to a reference to that, because we can say factory.create. What's it say? Do not Do not declare visible instance fields. Well, why? Do not declare visible instance fields. The primary use of a field should be an implementation detail. Fields should be private or internal and should be exposed by using properties. It is as easy to access a property as it is to access a field, and the code in the accessor of a property can change as the features of the type expand without introducing breaking changes. Okay. I understand. So I mean that's valid. It's test code, but it's valid. Let's see. So yeah, we're gonna assign it to a private variable, and then what do you say? We have a protected use auto property. Ooh, I like that. I like that. I like all these code actions. It's like really driving you to help write better code. Okay, then let's go back to writing our first test, right? So this is all the whole point of this, if you're wondering like what the hell are you doing? The whole point of this is basically we're setting that foundation to be able to very easily write integration tests to test our endpoints or to test different cases against our endpoints without having to always go to some sort of separate tool like Postman or Swagger to test something. We can write a test, debug that test, um, explore the API's actual kind of API surface from our test. Yeah, without ever having to kind of leave our project to leave our terminal. Um, and that's because of that web application factory allowing us to bootstrap our API into memory and run it all in memory. So very cool. You can even do things like integrating with databases running in Docker. It's very powerful. It's a very nice. It's one of the primary reasons I love to write APIs in .NET because it makes testing them so convenient. Let's go over here and type not integration test. What are we going to type? We're going to type. We're just going to put a weather forecast test. And yes, we aren't really going to have weather forecast, but I want to get to the point where we have a test. But I don't want to take the time because I need to stop because lunchtime is over. But I do want to kind of illustrate the power of this, right? So there's Copilot trying to help me out again. Weather forecast test. Let's see if Copilot can. Oh, and then we also want to inherit, right? So the reason to have that base integration test is now I don't really have to have a ton of boilerplate setup code. I can just say, is it gonna complete? Come on, Copilot, do your job. So I can just write a fact, and I can say public async task, and I can get the weather. I can add some usings. Change weather forecast to weather forecast test. Oh. So I should be able to get that type, that weather forecast type, which is just a record, but it's not visible to my test project because it's not public. which is fine. I don't want to have to make everything public to test it. So the way you fix this is need to fix that error. No. So going back, the okay, so what I want to do is I want to get this JSON and I want to deserialize it to this weather forecast type in my test, but this weather forecast isn't public. I can make it public, but I don't want to make everything public in order to test everything in my project. So one of the things you can do is you can actually go to your CS proj and you can add an item group, and it's going to say internals visible to, and you're going to include your test project. And you can hard code this, but typically what I like to do is I just like to use my naming convention. So I will say something like assembly name dot test. And now if I go back to my test file, my weather forecast now resolves, which is fantastic. Well, it would help if I would learn to type in NeoVim. There we go. Oh, and I need to learn to write C#. Where is... Oh, yep, and I need to add a constructor. Yep, and then I need to add primary constructor like that. Why is my weather forecast not resolving? I wonder if I need to... Not resolving. Did I not do that attribute right? Internal. Oh, I think it's internals. Yeah, internals. There we go. Finally. Okay. Real quick, let me, for the sake of making a short about this, let me undo what I've done here. So, Control P, go to CS Proj. Delete this. Write that out. Go to weather forecast tests. Okay. So I'm writing this test and I want to be able to deserialize the response from my API to that same weather forecast type that's actually in my API project. But right now, that weather forecast isn't public, and I could go and make it public. It's probably going to be public anyhow. However, I want to show you how you can actually solve this when you're wanting to test types or use types in your test that maybe you actually don't want to be also publicly accessible from that main project. So the way you can fix this in .NET is you can go to your CS proj and you can type something called item group, which you're just basically adding some new properties here, and we're going to say internals visible to, and we're going to include our test project. Now, you could hard code this, but usually what I like to do is stick with a naming convention, and so I will say assembly name dot test. Now, if I write that out and I go back to my weather forecast tests and I give it a little edit here, now that type's being properly resolved. So super handy, that internals visible to attribute or that property group in your CS proj can help you expose types from that main project to your test without exposing them to everybody in the world. Super helpful. All right, people. I'm getting close on really pushing my limit here on how much time I can get away with taking. So I am going to see if I can run this test really quick. So let's type space. Actually, let's see if it shows up in our Explorer. So space TS. No, not space TS. Control T. And then let's go over there to that window. And it shows we have two tests. So this is the unit test that came when we generated the XUnit file, or the XUnit project, but this is the test we just wrote. So let's try to run it. Mark it, and then type T at TSR. Yep, and so what it did was it actually loaded the API up into memory, and then it actually made a request against that API. So you can actually see that if we go to program.cs, if we add a breakpoint here, let's see, DT, if we add a breakpoint here, we go back over to our test code and we type space TD, this should actually debug the nearest test. So space TD. Do I not have that mapped? Oh, I don't have that mapped. Let me fix that real quick. How do I fix this? Sorry, my brain gets like overwhelmed with what keys do I need to press to navigate this NeoVim thing, and then like my brain freezes. I can't think, or I can't speak or think properly. So quit write all. What? Oh, write quit all. So let's edit my indent big. Let's go to debug. Do I not have? Oh no, it's not debug. It's neo test. Do I not have? Yeah, I don't have it. Okay, so vim dot key map. Let's set reader td neotest dot run debug. Oh, oh. I thought there was a debug. Hold on. H neotest dot run. be in fact close. This one actually needs to be a little bit more complicated, so we're going to say set in leader td. And this needs to be a function. This is going to be debug nearest test. And this right here. My watch is yelling at me too that I need to stand up. But I know I've been streaming too long. I think that's actually what I want. What Copilot just said is what I want, but I want to make sure. Test. Then weather forecast test, and then let's also open the splits. Let's open program. So let's set a breakpoint here. Then let's go over to our test file and let's say space td. Something's happening. You can see it's running this file. So let's see. Config references missing adapter netcore debug available. Oh, shoot. Sorry guys. Right quit all. Go to edit. Actually, we're going to go to indem data. We're going to remove all this stuff. Then we're going to go back home, back to alt text. Then we're going to edit our indem config. And we need to go to neo test. There's it in here. We need to add another option. It's options. Is there help for that? Neo test. .net. I don't think this is what we're looking for. We are looking for neotest.net. This guy. Basically, we need to make sure we specify the correct adapter we want to use. Not net core debug. I called it core CLR. Okay, so let's go back to our program.cs. Jump down here. PT to toggle breakpoint. Let's open a new pane, vsplit. Let's go over there and let's go to our weather forecast. And we'll type space D, whoops, space TD. And now this should work. Famous last words. Now this should work. Famous last words. But it does. Okay, so you can see my test file, right, is again literally loading that application up into memory and now making requests against it. So now we should be able to continue, and our test should all pass. We go back to weather forecast tests. We can see got some passing tests. So yeah, it's pretty cool. So I know I literally know that I did not write any code to actually implement our alt text generator. I understand that all I did really was get our project set up and wired together. But taking this time up front in any project to set it up correctly and put at the very minimal some formatting, some linting, and some testing or a test framework in place up front is going to pay dividends in the long run for your project. It really, really, and for your productivity as you're working on that project. It really, really will. Okay, I need to go back and do some work. So I appreciate you guys tuning in and watching. Apologies that we weren't able to get to a little bit of actually implementation on this idea, but I promise we will in future streams and future episodes, and in future videos. So thanks for watching. If you stuck around and hung out, I appreciate it. Kept me company on my lunch. I will talk to you guys next time. See y'all.